right, homebrewed Christianity listeners, this is Trip, and today you're getting a special little treat. I'm joined by two amazing people, Diana Butler, Bass Church historian, public scholar of religion, and Reggie Williams, theological ethicist. And we have ourselves a good old time. This is from our Ruining Dinner series. That's right. Diana Butler Bass and I decided during this election season we were going to cultivate a little solidarity among the people who are, having to decide how you talk about religion and politics as things get crazier and crazier. And we're joined by Reggie Williams, who is, surprise, surprise, a former student of Diana Butler Bass. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Wow. Anyway, you'll hear about that, and this is just half of our conversation that we recorded a few days ago after the debate and everything. If you want to hear the entire thing and hear Diana unpacking the history of American evangelicalism and its relationship to politics in detail, and then how that compares with the mainline Protestant moves and the growing religious pluralism of our current context, then go to ruiningdinner.com, sign up, and you'll get access to the video and audio of the entire thing. You'll get invited into our Facebook group and the ability to join all the future Ruining Dinner conversations live. You can join us on Zoom, join us in the Facebook group. It's going to be a good old time, okay? Go to ruiningdinner.com, join up, and you can donate whatever you want, including $0. So if you just want to have a group of people and get the other half of all the conversations, then come join the fun. Before we hop in, I just want to say thank you to all the Homebrewed members. People that went to homebrewedcommunity.com. That group. Thank you. This is a wild and crazy time, and I'm so thrilled that I get to keep bringing amazing interviews from super duper guests for you to think and reflect with. So I appreciate it. If you want to join the Homebrewed community and make things like this possible, go to homebrewedcommunity.com. You'll get invited to our private Facebook group. You will get the secret super members only podcast feed, which has access to a whole bunch of classes, lectures, and all sorts of things. So yeah, consider it. All right. Now here we go. Ruining Dinner with Reggie Williams, Diana Butler Bass, and myself.
Vision of what a political life means in relationship to the gospel. And there is Reggie Williams, who I adore. And now everybody knows that who's listening to us.
Awesome. I'm gonna have to be intentional. It feels weird not to say Dr. Butler.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You have to tell the story now, Reggie, because you're on, man. You got it.
Oh, yeah. So we met at our alma mater, our undergrad alma mater, except Diana was not a student. She was my professor when I was an undergrad at I'm just going to say our alma mater.
Okay.
Yeah, at our alma mater. So I was a theology and church history major at the school, and Diana taught, I think you taught all of my history courses within my major.
Yeah, I did.
All of my history courses, and really taught me to love history, in fact. It came to life. I loved those classes. I was eating them up. And I'm not just saying that, because of course, if I didn't, I would have just said, you taught them. I would have just said, she taught them. But I learned to love it. That came to life for me quite a bit. And I have those books partially I'm in my home office. I'm actually in Wakanda. See this? You see the panther here? But I'm in my home office. I got them here and in my office at the seminary. So yeah, it was incredible, wonderful.
Well, I know you love them because I remember you so well as a student, just sort of coming in, and sometimes, and you know this now because you're a professor, is that sometimes you get a student who sits in the classroom and you see that moment when their eyes pop open. And you know that all of a sudden that person has experienced the subject, not just memorizing some facts. And you were that kind of student where it was just like you moved from like the further back in the room to the front row. You know?
Yeah, that was me.
Yes,
that was me. With notebooks full in my basement. Yeah, I kept them. I kept them all. I did not. Some classes, when the class was done, tossed those notebooks. But that was me. But yeah.
Well, I'm sure that if I had a class from you, I would have your notebooks here. So, and I feel like some of certainly the book that you have written and the things that you have written that aren't in books and the sermons I've heard you preach and all those other things. You know, this is what a life and learning really is that I've learned from you. And that is such a gift. You know, I could share one gift with you and you've been able to share enormous gifts back. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
and,
it's very sweet. I just feel like someone needs to start singing like in the background.
We like each other, obviously.
Can you feel the love tonight?
Well, you know, it's a great thing because actually Reggie and I were together during this time period that we were just talking about in the early 90s. That's when I was a professor at this school from which I had graduated, and Reggie was a student, and it was an interesting moment in the development of the religious right, because the election of 94 was the Contract for America election where Newt Gingrich became the Speaker of the House. And it was one of the sort of high water marks of, I think, part of the religious right. You know, the real Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell generation, the early 1990s was when they were in control of that movement. And they had power and the microphone. And I remember writing in 1996, I went to the Republican National Convention. I felt like I was at the Gettysburg of the religious right. And so I think it was the Gettysburg of the first generation of that. But Reggie, I don't know if you were at my apartment, but I think you might have been when during the 1994 election. I had a group of students at my apartment the night that those returns came in, and we were all sitting around my living room and just watching this incredible shift towards what we could see being a theocratic vision for America. And that had just been elected to the Congress.
That's right. That's right. Your dog bit me.
Oh my gosh.
That evening. Your dog, little dog. He wasn't very big. It wasn't a bad one, but he bit me.
So sorry, Reggie. I forgot that part.
Yeah, I do. I remember that. The interesting thing is, okay, so we go through transitions in life. Those of us who have the privilege of going through transitions see multiple sides of society, you know, and those days, coming from the family that I was raised in, I was just trying to be a Christian. I wasn't interested in evangelical, mainline, whatever those names were. I was just trying to be Christian. It just so happens the Christian family that I was in was a Black evangelical family. It was Black evangelical. So it was really strange to come to that school and meet white evangelicals and have a different, or like different interest in music, different interest, lots of things that are just different. And then my experience not being within the scope of, you know, possibility at all but was still, there was some similarities in terms of a very thin set of issues that were litmus test for whether or not you're Christian. We kind of shared those. So this movement of a theocracy was exciting. It was exciting at that time. We're going to make the kingdom of God on earth. I remember those moves, and of course they come with a certain outlet of information. You listen to this radio station, you watch this television show, you listen to this music, and these are their approved speakers on the radio. Everything is really thin, really narrowed, and makes for a certain a subgroup in a culture war. Mm-hmm. I kept searching. I had lots of questions because I wasn't just evangelical was not important to me. I didn't even know what it was. What does evangelical mean? I mean, give me a definition. There are different. There are people with that who will do that now. Who I shouldn't say who will do that now. I know the definitions now. I should say, I know the definitions now, but none of them really meant anything to me then. Mm-hmm. At that time. But because I never really felt like the jacket fit, it wasn't a place, looking back now, that was home. So, there's a little bit of personal story there, which is why I don't name that place, because I may want to talk about them while we're here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, you talk about having these shared theological beliefs at that point, and in the 90s, you see how those beliefs then get harnessed for a political agenda that is committed to a type of white supremacy that a growing number of white people starting to recognize, right? But it took time for last week, Daniel White Hodge was on the podcast and talked about how, there's a series of breakups he had to go through before he realized he really couldn't be spending all this time with white evangelicals in the same way that he had, because they had nourished his faith so much early on. And I was struck because I was like, I felt the same way because I was a Baptist church planters kid. And then we got in trouble because we had LGBTQ members, but we didn't think it was weird. We were just introducing them to Jesus and God loves everybody. And this seems obvious. Or, there are certain things in evangelicalism, if you don't realize that it's also connected to this kind of perverse political current, that you can end up thinking you're the most faithful person in your youth group and then getting kicked out. And the next place you don't know really where you're going to go, because you still read the Bible and pray every day. You're just also committed to the material transformation of an order that's going on. And the people that taught you to read the Bible and pray are looking at you like you're a heretic. And
right.
And how do you see, especially as someone who not only went through it, but spends time in the different boundaries of that process, how has that transition or that story of moving through it changed as the domination logic of really white supremacy connected to the stream within Republican politics become more clear?
How has that domination, the presence of authoritarianism and so forth, how has that content become clearer to me?
Well, not just clear to you, but how, as it's become clear, changed the ability for people to exist in multiple worlds that,
Yeah, interesting. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this, Diana, but I don't think people have really ever been able to exist in multiple worlds coming out of that movement. Being in that movement, I think it's been very clear that to be a part of that movement is to be behind high walls, period. From its onset, really, it's culture wars, it's retreat, it's run on slogans, and there isn't a real mix with the world, so to speak. You got the sacred and the secular, and you exist within the sacred. Now, for Black people, there's always been this kind of a blend, even within the blend. Within the behind the walls, so to speak, because there is still reference to the body, which has then this social space of habitation. So the body in society, there's at least some reference to that. Now, there's mixtures of deep problems even there within a Black conservative perspective, because it's going to be heterosexist and patriarchal, within quite a number of circles, unless you have this really strong focus on justice, which takes it then out of the Black evangelical worldview, because there's a concern about what people like Martin Luther King Jr. said: the church being a thermostat, not just a thermometer, making a change for the way that society is experienced by people. But in short, to answer your question, Chip, I don't think there's ever been really a possibility of existing in multiple worlds. I think here's the thing. You have, in my institution where I work at now, this conversation about interreligious dialogue. Okay. How in the world are you going to do it with evangelical? Coming from the world that I come from, the only way that you have contact with others, whoever they may be, let's say this now, other religions, is to convert them. Mm-hmm. The goal is to convert them from a burning hell, from a fiery burning hell. That's it. If you don't do that, you're not loving them. You can't have real contact, real interreligious dialogue if you believe your neighbor's going to hell. So yeah, you exist within the realm of the saved and the sacred. And what's interesting is that sacred and saved world that I knew in that space was white people. It was white, holy people. And there is a connection between this moral, holy, racialized space and centuries of interaction with the African continent too. So, yeah.
Reggie, I really appreciate the language you used of narrowing and walls. I mean, I think that that's really important to think about. The topic that Tripp and I are trying to unpack over these weeks is about religion and politics. And, I think about when we first knew one another. Part of what was happening there, and to hear that from your perspective, just really shed light on on what I was feeling too. So here I was, a woman who had been forced behind these walls. And one of the things that I discovered about evangelicalism is that when I came into it as a teenager, they said, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. And my initial feelings about evangelicalism was that it was freedom. And it was fun. It was, and this is the 70s, so this is going back pretty far, but it was like, it was Larry Norman and Christian rock and roll and this sort of wild sense that you could go down to the beach and get baptized in the waves. And there was a lot of freedom that seemed to be promised. But the further I went along in the subculture, the more restricted it became. Mm-hmm. And so by the time that I had gotten my doctorate, I knew what the expectations were for a white Christian woman. Mm. And that was to be, good and pure and quiet and appropriately submissive. Even if you're an academic, there's still an appropriate submission that you're supposed to bring to all of that. And so by the time that I knew you as a professor, and I'm pretty sure I'm well aware that you and your classmates understood that I was uncomfortable with the walls. Yeah, that's right. And what was happening to me, as a professor, is that all the students who were uncomfortable with the walls came to my office all the time. Yeah. The gay students, the women who wanted to be feminists, the people who were sort of questioning their own sexuality. I don't even think that there were 6 Black students, I think, at Westmont at the time. All 6 of you came into my office, Asian students. And so my office was literally a parade of amazing people between the ages of 18 and 22 who were questioning the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a really interesting thing for me to have that experience with you all as a person who was 12 years older at that time. And of course, my questioning of the walls got me fired. But I think that that's what we were all experiencing at that moment, was we were living in a culture where the political walls were narrowing. And certainly the theological walls were narrowing. And here were this group of people, whether professors, and there were a few other professors who were very uncomfortable with the walls. And they happened to be male, so they made it through the system more easily than I could. So there were those people, and you knew who they were. And somehow the students coalesced around that, who were equally uncomfortable with those walls. And so that idea of narrowing, but then having to kick the walls down in order to find real freedom.
Yeah. And there's danger in moving those walls, at least ideological. For the person to move the walls oftentimes means breaking loyalty with someone they trust. Breaking loyalty with some relationship. It's interesting how the language of love is so thrown around, tossed around, care, love. I lost roommates because they say, one said, "Hey man, I love you. So I'm only telling you this because I love you." But that school, they're accepting of gay people. So I love you. So, but if you go there, you'll never hear from me again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how this thing works within that space is to change something of the rules, is to break loyalty. What's interesting is that when people make arguments, like right now in the political theater we're watching, that arguments, if they're transparent, I mean, last night Pence was full of lies. And somebody was quoting you, by the way, something you'd said on Twitter about how, if I were to find that, I don't know if I can find it. I thought it was hilarious. You said that just the same as Trump, except for in that kind of evangelical pastor kind of way.
Yeah, I said that Pence reminded me of so many white evangelical male pastors that I had known. Yeah.
It is very sincere, in a voice that conveys concern because he loves you. In bold face, just be cruel and mean and lying in a loving tone. I'm familiar with that. Tone.
I would think we all believe you now.
You did a very good imitation of it. It scared me.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm familiar with that tone. It's like, just out of love and concern for you, brother.
Yeah.
And just be so full of venom. And the venom is not here. It's not just tossing, just name calling here. Let's talk about the actual lived impact of what it is that you're saying. Okay, the lived embodied impact on what it is you're saying. And I can circle one of them in particular. To claim that there is a systemic racism.
Oh my gosh.
To claim that the police officers are somehow bad. You're going to make these blanket total claims to disregard the actual lived experience of people in this country, like Breonna Taylor, who couldn't even sleep in safety. Disregard the string of them that we are now seeing being recorded on video cameras because everybody's a reporter. You can just totally wipe it away and then wrap it all up in violent protest as if none of that matters because of violent protest.
Right.
And do it in such sincere, genteel tones of care. That's the movement that I'm familiar with coming out of there. Really to leave that and to move those walls is to break some of the relationships that you felt comfortable with, but somehow or another had the capacity to deceive with love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That one bit in the my son, who's 12 in Scotland, sees debate things because it's not on when we're on random clips put on social media that manage to get on his feed, usually because his Scottish friends are making fun of us. So today he's like, Dad, watch this, and it's Pence's answer about about how there's not really racism and we got to stand up for cops, that whole little bit. And he goes, Dad, what does he mean? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, it sounds like he just says he doesn't care and is wanting to say it without saying it. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, but are you allowed to think that and be president? Is that it?
Wow.
And I was like, yes. And you saw this pause, and then he goes, do we know anyone that's voting for him?
Mm.
And are they Christian?
My gosh. Yeah. Wow.
And he immediately goes to that. And I mean, he's told me we shouldn't eat beef if we're Christians. And I'm like, yeah, probably not, but so
burger, son.
Yeah. I'm like, what if we cut it down, our meat consumption? I mean, that's not, he wasn't like doing moral high horse. He takes it genuinely seriously. And is going, is there any way I can interpret him more generously than he's a racist doing cover up for this and just not wanting to admit it? And I was like, probably not. He's like, are you allowed to be president and do that? Is he a Christian? Do we know any Christians that think this is okay? And it's one of these embarrassing moments because every answer you give him goes, yeah, the world I'm handing you isn't nearly as good as I wish it was. And I want to be a part of there being a deeper reservoir of values in the community. And I hope, I'm embarrassed by the world. We each get a little more embarrassed each generation as we figure things out. But I don't know what to do with that. There's no soft pedaling the answers.
Right.
I remember the day that I think Emma was 9 when this happened, but she saw Al Mohler debating Bishop Gene Robinson on CNN about religion and being gay. And Emma happened to know Gene Robinson because he was a friend of mine. And so she'd heard him preach in church and he'd been really nice to her. And she grew up in a family where nobody ever said anything other than, hey, we're having Joe and Pete over for dinner tonight. That was our big discussion about gay stuff, is having gay couples at our dinner table. And so she just she just grew up in a world where this was kind of normal. And so she heard this debate and she looked at me in the middle of the debate and she had huge tears in her eyes. And she said, Mommy, I never knew there were Christians who hated gay people before.
Mm.
And I felt like just such a slime ball that I actually let her watch the television. And she all of a sudden she heard this narrative of this vitriol. And that was all that I knew growing up. I'm sure, Reggie, you have a story like that, probably talking to your son, perhaps, about police violence or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, you feel vulnerable. How much of the world do you want to give them, and how soon? We were at Disney World. My kids were 5 and 6 in Florida at Disney World. On one hand, we're talking about a fortune that I was putting on a credit card. On the other hand, we're talking about, the happiest place on earth. Mm. When we had to have a conversation about white supremacy. That was the first conversation we had about white supremacy. I just decided I wasn't going to let that encounter with that woman, that white woman at the gift store, just slide. I wasn't going to try and protect them from it. I'm going to let them know what happened there when she pushed past us in a violent way she didn't really lay her hands on me. I just knew that as she was pushing, move out of the way and hold my daughter to me so she could see what I'm doing. And she looked at us with that look, and then looked back at us with that look as she moved away. What was going on there? How do you interpret that moment? Why was that lady so mean? And then we come back into our room and turn on the TV, and there was this narrative going on about a group of people in that part of the country and singing these songs about white pride. Okay, time to have the conversation. I'm not going to change the channel. I'm not going to change what happened just there. These microaggressions that speak louder to your personhood, and where people might say, well, you can interpret that in multiple different ways. Yeah, you can. You can interpret it. When you have a string of them on a daily basis and you have big things happening at the same time, it's not a matter of just how you see the world with rose-colored glasses. Your body is also being seen, and you need to interpret how this is happening. What does this mean? This evening, I'm teaching my course on Black aesthetics. I'm teaching Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk.
Wow.
This first half of it for tonight, and then the second half of it next week. He's born in 1868 in Greater Barrington, Massachusetts. Okay, this is in the North. 1868, 3 years after slavery, after the Civil War is over. Okay. 1896, Plessy v. Ferguson makes segregation legal in the United States. He's 28 years old, having completed a dissertation at Harvard as the first African American to have done this. He's watching this unfold. He's a child during Reconstruction. Okay, when Black people not only own properties and are getting educated finally and are being elected to office, political office, he sees all of this stuff being rescinded and being turned around. He's watching it all happen. He writes Souls of Black Folk in 1903 as he's trying to make sense of the failures of this nation to reboot itself after the Civil War. It fails on this group of people. And he's trying to make sense of that. Well, we are living today in that failure. There's a journalist who goes into the South. He sees a Black police officer arrest a white man. He sees white people speaking openly, friendly, and conversational with Black people they don't know. And he's thinking, the dawn of a new era is coming. It's 1898. He was way wrong.
Yeah.
Way wrong. We are right now within another one of those turnings where Black people had made political progress, had some sense of home and citizenship here in the United States, only to have it violently jerked back in the effort to keep the ideological parameters set in place by slavery as the law of the land. Yeah. And here, we're not talking about owning Black people. We're just talking about making sure that we recognize that this is a country for whites.
And, honestly, Reggie, I have heard it just in probably the last year, more Christians say, even to push it towards the idea of enslavement. I've heard more Christians say in the last year that, it wasn't such a bad thing that when we held slaves. Mm-hmm. I've literally heard prominent Christian people in public saying that it was a mistake to have freed people who were enslaved. And so, we are actually, people are intellectually, some level of leaders are intellectually even moving towards that. That's how bad it is. And it's really interesting to me that in a very, it's a sad and horrible thing about our history, but the enslavement, this is why I'm always trying to talk to people about Black Lives Matter. The enslavement of Black people is like the leading edge of the enslavement of the rest of us. And it's like those freedoms are being ripped back for you all. And then I think about my gay friends who are terrified. And just this week, the whole thing about the Supreme Court saying, maybe we didn't decide that thing about their marriage is right. And all of a sudden, all my gay friends who are my white gay friends, their eyes are wide open, And then, of course, the whole Trump presidency is built on racism and misogyny, both. And, women, we have felt our bodies deeply threatened through this whole thing. But it always, God.
Yeah. Right.
It horrifies me that it manifests first for people of color, but it never stops there.
No, because absolutely not. By the way, am I breaking up here? Is my internet connection stable?
We can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay.
All good.
Because I'm getting a signal that the connection is not. If I need to switch servers, I can do that. Yeah. So what's important to recognize here is that the country itself is founded in the context of the development of biological anthropology as a field of study, and what some may describe as the project of the Western man. This sets in place an archetype, a template, a human, an ideal that in the 20th century develops into three overtly racist regimes. Jim Crow, which is built on centuries of work. Okay. Nazi Germany and apartheid South Africa. All of these they work according to a template, a white, self-determining, autonomous, masculine sovereign. You're human in aesthetic proximity to this thing. Mm-hmm. So this means women, white women, women of color, all of you beneath him. You have your place. Mm-hmm. Black men, you have your place. But the problem with some of my brothers, some of us brothers, is that we're okay. We'd be okay with the sexism. Just don't like the racism. We can be okay with the classism and the sexism. We just don't like the racism. We could be okay with heterosexism and the classism and the sexism. We just don't like the racism. Mm-hmm. When you touch on a portion of this type and say, let's do away with that, but keep the rest, you're part of the problem. You remain trapped within the problem. So the question for us is people who believe, for people of faith, whose faith may end up being locked up in an archetype that's represented as the Son of God, which is really what this thing ends up being. Mm-hmm. It becomes a kind of a cultural fetish, represented in theological form as Jesus, the ideal human. Those of us who recognize ourselves as, or would describe ourselves as people of faith, is to disentangle our devotion from this project of the Western human that gets manifest as deity to a Christ who brings us into actual relationship with actual neighbors, with actual people, without hierarchy, without in and outward group distortions. Does that make any sense? I'm just kind of spouting stuff right now, I feel like.
No, actually, Reggie, that made so much sense that I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about, I just finished the last chapter of a book that I wrote about Jesus. It's getting published in March. And the last chapter is called The Universal Jesus. And, it pushes towards that very thing you're talking about. And I felt, actually, here's Methodist child Diana, I felt my heart strangely warmed by what you're saying, but because I don't know if you remember this or not, but Janet McKenzie, the Catholic artist. In the year 2000.
Oh yeah, I know that. Yes.
Yeah, in the year 2000, she won a contest, a global contest put on by the Catholic Church, to create an icon of Jesus.
Yes.
And the icon is essentially a visualization of what you're talking about. And you can't tell when you look at that Jesus, if it's a male Jesus or a female Jesus, if it's a Native American Jesus or a Black Jesus or an Asian Jesus. She somehow created a universal Jesus in depicting the humanity of Jesus through art. And I remember when it won, how controversial that was. And people were horrified by it. Because it was an unrecognizable Jesus.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be. It should be the Jesus that you just explained.
Yeah. If I can.
Oh, are you looking it up? There it is. Oh my gosh. I love that icon.
Yep. That's him. That's the Jesus. I shouldn't that what she was doing. Yeah, that's the Jesus. That's the one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you corrected that because the gender thing is there too, especially in the big picture. You can really kind of see it's like male, female.
Yeah.
So
she did that to have a gender. It's you don't know, male, female, Native American, Black, European, what? It's an all-encompassing Jesus.
Yeah. And that you were just verbalizing that theologically. It made me think of that picture instantaneously. And I had just written about it in this chapter that I just put to bed. So, and I don't know. There are just several things that I'm thinking that I wanted to touch on just a little bit before we closed. And that is, I'm thinking about Tripp's son, can you be president of the United States and have these views? And Mike Pence was trying to hide those views with the theology that you and that all of us here know so well, that masks the sinfulness and the evil underneath that kind of unctuous piety. And yet today, I don't know if either of you heard this, but Trump came on. He called into Fox Business this morning and did a sort of an hour-long manic interview. And in the course of that interview, he referred twice to Kamala Harris as that monster.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so Trump took what Pence was actually saying, but Pence was doing it in that nice, coolly brushed form of the evangelical white pastor that I made the joke about on Twitter last night. And Trump just stripped it away and said exactly what the central point is that a Black woman is the monster that every rich white man in power like Donald Trump fears most.
I mean, she also used complete sentences and prosecuted a case rather directly and told him he was a complete failure, and then stated directly what their agenda was. Like, do you want your kids to be on your health insurance? They're coming for you, right? Like, they're coming for you line was the moment where you're just like, yes, this is exactly what's happening. Finally, let's go ahead and be honest. They're coming for you. And Mike Pence is sitting down like he's trying to explain to you to sign a True Love's Waits card or something, It's,
oh, God.
Yeah.
So one of there were a couple questions that people sent in knowing that Reggie was going to be here and to get y'all to talk about. So I'm not going to answer them, but I want to ask them and then let y'all y'all decide how y'all want to talk about them. And one of them, one question that came in multiple ways was, I know we're supposed to pray for our enemies, but do I really have to pray for Trump when he has COVID? Should I feel bad if I'm not going to? Or should I get credit that I didn't pray that it worked real well? And there are variations of this. But, I know Diana wrote a piece about it. And, the theological ethicist has to figure out, especially one that hung out with Glenn Stassen. I don't know what just peacemaking is when it goes to this situation, but how do we use this conversation to think theologically about the call of discipleship and then the clarity of prophetic resistance?
Well, I did write about that, so anybody can go and read my piece on my Substack page just this week, and I can't wait to hear what Reggie says.
I see you. I see that. I saw he's like, I'm going to get that one off.
I'm throwing that one right to you.
Oh my gosh. It's funny that you should ask that question right now. I do this Bible study on Monday mornings with a rabbinic scholar here in Chicago. And we started into Joshua 1. I'm under a contract to write a commentary on Joshua and Judges as a theological ethicist.
Oh, wow.
And it terrifies me. Okay. Am I still coming through clear?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Terrifies me to be contracted to be writing this commentary. But what he said in our conversation, it veered in the direction of hatred. Now, I am formed by the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. and Black church and the civil rights struggle. That's been dear to me since I was 10. Hatred is something we are to avoid at all costs. James Baldwin, to paraphrase him, says, never let them make you hate them. Don't let them make you hate them, even if you have to shoot them in the head. Hatred is something to avoid. King says, if you nurture it in your bosom, you can't control it. Or was that Thurman? You can't control hatred. It's like a fire. Hatred, I think this is from his text, Jesus and the Disinherited. It's like trying to nurture a flame in your bosom. Doesn't just harm the people that you want to target. It burns you as well. And then the Bible says, love what is good and hate what is evil. Then we have the imprecatory Psalms, like 139 as well, which we quote this portion of it, and we skip over these verses and we quote this portion of it, this other portion of it. And if I am a lover of what is good, holy, and just, what do I do with the overtly unjust? Overt injustice. It is unabashedly, unashamedly harming people.
Right.
What do I do with this as somebody who loves what is good and what is wholesome and what is healthy? I own a shop. I got valuable stuff and I love it. This is a kleptomaniac who can't help but steal. I know that. How often do I let them in my store without restraint? Right. They're just going to steal. This is just what they do. Even if they can't control it. So the question is, for me, is someone who loves good, loves what is holy, what is just, what is healthy for community, what enables human flourishing in my neighbor. What do I do with the enemy of that? I'm not going to be, I'll be completely transparent at this moment in my life. I do not pray for Donald Trump. I do not pray for him. There is, on one hand, there is a conflict about what is best for humanity and my neighbor. And on the other hand, there are personal triggers as well. Right. And he harms both of them. So no, I don't. That's just me being completely transparent. Now, Glenn, in his transforming initiatives, work 14 transforming initiatives on the Sermon on the Mount, paying attention to especially the one commandment to love your enemies. He takes that to the conclusion, the end of this commandment is be perfect. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, as the scripture would say. But as he understands it, the word perfect there is translated oftentimes in the language of high ideals and hard sayings. And nobody can be perfect. So it's meant to show you that you can't do what Jesus is asking you to do. So just love God and do what you will. But perfect, the word is teleos. Means, we get the word telos, the end of a thing, the intent of a thing, its completion, its formation. He understood that to mean be complete, meaning not just your own, but people outside of your people group. And in some versions of the gospel, the next chapter was the story of the compassionate Samaritan, where a Jew where a Samaritan saves a Jewish person, somebody other than your group. That's that demonstrates not trying to foster some emotion for somebody who will kill you and your people, or people like you, should they get the chance, like this guy's doing in the White House, but for your ability to see the need for justice in your neighbor's context like your own. Again, it's linked to the language of inclusion and justice. Very things that this administration loathes, mocks.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where I'm at right now with that. That's where I'm at. I mean, it seems to me to embrace this movement, really, that is given the highest platform in the nation, is to somehow be apathetic about harm and evil. And I can't bring myself to that place yet. I mean, I shouldn't say yet. I can't bring myself to that place, is to be apathetic about what is happening.
Reggie, I haven't prayed for Donald Trump by name this entire time. And back in January of 2017, when the Episcopal Church, of which I'm a member, held the inauguration prayer service for him at the Washington National Cathedral, I made a very big deal in public about not praying for Donald Trump, and that it was an act of harm. And the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church wrote an entire letter against me. Which was kind of hilarious. That's kind of how I spent my whole career, I think. But so anyway, but I haven't been able to pray for him at all. And this piece that I just wrote this week about praying for Trump, I separated out 3 different kinds of prayer. Might help people, not just to chase them to my Substack, but I talk about public prayer, which I have found most problematic in the last 4 years. But then there's also, of course, what you're talking about is prophetic prayer. And then there's personal prayer. And so for me, I've spent the confession piece for me, even though I wrote about all 3 of those rather fairly in this piece I just put out. I really have not been able to participate in public prayer for Donald Trump. I've had to mentally skip that part when it's come up in church, or when I've heard politicians talk in prayer-like language. I just kind of I can't go there. But what I have been able to do, and I do say this in that same little article that I just wrote, is that the prayer of Mary, that's to me is a prayer about Donald Trump, casting the rulers off of their throne. The rich are going to get sent away hungry. I am really happy to pray that prayer.
I can see that.
And so there's that piece. So I can pray prophetically in public about Donald Trump. It's just that pastoral kind of nice prayer that I have trouble with. But then the personal prayer, it's yeah, sure, sometimes it's imprecatory.
Yeah. That's much clearer. That's very, very helpful. Much, much clearer. Because when we talk about praying for, we talk about extending welcome, inclusion, and love some kind of way, hope for, and that seems to me to be turning one's heart away from the location where it should have your focus. There are people being harmed, and to wrap, I guess, one's mind and heart around this person with something that we would call, again, this misuse of the language of love. I think it's harmful. But I'm sorry, Trip, but I just love what you just said.
Oh, wow. And then he froze. We just did lose Reggie. Oh, there he comes back.
Sorry.
You're back.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad that was helpful. And, it was interesting for me to hear that from you, because I've gotten so much grief for that thing that I did in 2017 when I said that it was an act of harm to pray for Donald Trump in public worship. Because I just felt that so many people would be sitting in a congregation and just hearing the name would feel like an abuse. And yeah. And so the place that I've gotten to is I can sort of pray generally, like when we were just asked by the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church this week to pray for him and his wife that they be healed. I just said, okay, I pray that all the people right now who are suffering from COVID would find healing, and so I could include them with in a universal public prayer, but to call them out specifically vis-a-vis the fact that the guy who has been the security officer at the White House for 37 years or whatever it is suffering in the hospital and has been since mid-September with COVID, and I'm not asked to pray for him by name. That seems inequitable and somehow not part of the kingdom of God. And so that's I've kind of had a journey on that public prayer piece, but it still is, I do think about it just like you do, in that what you were explaining about harm and where justice is and how we balance these things.
Yeah.
The two things that popped in my head were one, there was a Twitter discussion and, not actually being around Americans and then showing up on Twitter and just saying what you think can be wonderful or really bad. And so there was a very heated conversation about this. And I was just like, I don't remember Moses going to the Israelites and being like, you know what? What if we fasted and prayed for Pharaoh? Like when you're thinking of that harm thing, but you do in the biblical text, there's two different explanations of Pharaoh's hardening of hearts, right? Like one is God did it, and the other is Pharaoh's just ridiculous. And all the consequences are the natural consequences of someone who resists using their agency and authority and stewardship as a leader for the well-being of the whole. Like when you turn inwards that much, then you will walk straight on into plague after plague till it gets to your home. And so after I realized I had been slightly aggressive and offended a number of people by suggesting their prayers they were writing for their church service to put Trump in it were Pharaoh-centric, I did say, if you're going to name someone, you should name Barron, his kid, who didn't pick his parents, and they're being reckless. Because I know as a minister, there's so many times, right? Like you get to know a family, and then you always go to this, like they're struggling with something, and you don't know what their responsibility is, but you always immediately go to the kid. But this is when you see that guy got stuck in a situation. Right? Like if you're going to use the name Dude Barron, but if you're going to talk about pray for the name of someone with COVID, you're going to have to go through the 7.3 million Americans that already had it before you get to Donald Trump. Like he has to go last, right. And that's not like I don't think that's like an immoral thing to think that you should have, to think about it that way. But there is this, I would say the anxiety, especially privileged white people have about not like feeling obligated. Just shows you how much nationalism has been internalized into Protestantism in America. That you really are sitting there going, but don't you think we should put we got to rework our liturgy to get Pharaoh in it this week because he's sick with something he denied and was absent as a leader and then mocked people for wanting to do something about. So we should probably make sure we pray for him, okay?
You give me the names of the housekeepers in the White House who are sick with COVID, and if you want me to pray for people by name, I'm going to start with them. And then I'll work towards Donald Trump. But Donald Trump gets no special prayers in that regard. And especially, I mean, I know those housekeepers are going to be Black women who live in the southeast part of DC. And so it's like, those are the people who are suffering from this so terribly. And really, I mean, that's where the justice prayer, comes into play. It's like, give me their names. They need to be named.
Yes, exactly. Amen. And I mean, let's be honest. He could have done something about this. The fact that the White House is now a hotspot of the coronavirus, is because of the recklessness that he himself has embraced. But this question really smacks to me of a conversation on following after Christ, on being Christian in a substantial way. It's on the one hand, in the best sense, it's just, I don't know what it means to like live a Christian life in relationship to this. I struggle to know what God would have me do. Should I pray for Trump? I really don't know. And so I'm going to pray for Trump because I think that's what God would have me to do. On the other hand, there is apathy, just profound apathy about what's happening. But it's like the distinction between passivism, PASSIVISM, and pacifism, which would mean nonviolent resistance. So on one hand is non-resistance of evil, because you think that's what Christian means. Don't resist evil. Let evil have its way. Turn the other cheek means just let evil just let evil have its way. And people find that to be an unrealistic way to live their life. Just let evil go, because that's what Jesus would do. No, that's not what that commandment would mean. The other one is, what King would describe as non-violent resistance of evil. Here, you put up a firewall to evil. You practice what the powers that be would call immorality, because you're not going to cooperate with evil. And evil is oftentimes placed in given a platform and setting the rules.
Right.
You're not going to cooperate with that. It's not patriotic to not cooperate. It's not Christian. It's immoral. But you're not going to cooperate. But you're not going to do it violently. You're going to do it non-violently. So the distinction between pacifism and passivism oftentimes gets Christians lost in a gap.
This Sunday is a really interesting text from the Revised Common Liturgy lectionary. It's from Philippians 4, and it's the one that says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious for anything." And so I'm preaching on this text this Sunday, and I keep thinking about it because this is the kind of text that you can do with, Reggie, what you were just saying, is that you can treat this text almost like it's a permission slip. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to just give in, if they're going to pray for Donald Trump during the liturgy, I'm just going to I'm just going to acquiesce, because that's the nice thing to do. And, and so I spent a lot of time going into each one of these different words, and I had a lot of fun with the Greek. I was just working on this today. And when I realized, I've got my notes sitting right here because I've got to put the sermon together. But when I realized that that word used for gentleness right there means justice beyond ordinary justice.
Wow.
And so I thought, oh my gosh. And I mean, literally every one of these words that's in this text that we usually interpret as be nice, Hallmark card, sentimental, don't get too worked up. Every one of them is has incredible depth. Like the word lovely shows up in the next paragraph, whatever is lovely. And that means to embrace whatever you prize.
Wow.
And so here's this text that on the surface is used in most white churches, in white evangelical churches and white mainline churches, I would add, to sort of reify holding back that powerful resistance, these are actually texts of resistance. And to know the real depth of the language that Paul is using, and to see that gentleness is not contrary to refusing to pray for Trump. Or it's not contrary of going onto Twitter and calling something true. Like, Trump called Kamala Harris a monster. That is unacceptable in every single way, shape, or form from a Christian perspective.
Right.
And so gentleness, loveliness, excellence, all of those things are absolutely, according to Paul, in line with the life of prophetic justice.
Amen.
Yeah. So there's one more question I wanted to ask, and knowing, or really interested in what Reggie thinks about it, because the question was sent in. I'll just read the question. I'm voted for Biden, so I guess they voted early. But it just pains me to see him already backtracking on climate initiatives like fracking, being vague about court packing, DC, PR, Puerto Rico statehood, filibuster stuff. Moderate Dems' inability to acknowledge the moral depravity of their opponents and existential crisis we face is so frustrating. Why? Are we naive? Are they naive? I'm suspicious they don't really want to change things much. Like when you think of like this moment and the need to change like directions as a country, right? Like I don't naturally get super energized about being a Democrat. But because like if the other options being a neo-fascist, being a really bland, too moderate neoliberal Democrat is thrilling. Like I wished I was never saying these words, but like, I've never been more thrilled for good old Joe, I'm just like super pumped. But the question I think is getting at something, and I wonder how you think about it as a theological ethicist and thinking about that, the relationship of kind of economic and class analysis, that so many times we get rallied up to vote just on putting a few people in the right places around identity or something, but not doing the structural change where we move into a more just and equitable society. And are we really making real progress, or are we getting exchanging chairs on a Titanic type of thing?
Well, first, on one hand, there are the ideological purists who want their vote to mean something lined up point by point with ideals, policy, or maybe claims of right within an ideological platform, and we need that pure. If you miss one or two, you're canceled. I'm not an ideological purist in that sense. If someone were to try to push or press me to have, they would find me on the progressive stream of Christianity in the United States, but I'm not an ideological purist. Here, I am formed within a community of people who, after we fought to win the vote, recognized that the nation is never going to be completely for us. This place is not for us. The apparatus of the government is not for us. I can't. So what I would do then is not to compromise, but I don't see the practice of compromise. And when I say compromise, I'm meaning accept a lower level somehow in the value judgment of the government. I see the vote as harm reduction. So you move in a direction politically that you know will reduce harm first. And in this case, there is no question which one will reduce harm, not just for minoritized communities, but for the planet. First. And secondly, there are a number of things that I don't like about this ticket. There just are. I was really disheartened to hear such an emphasis on fracking and keeping fracking last night. I mean, neither one of them really were my top candidates. Not at all. Not at all. And as a pastor whom I have a great deal of respect for she said, Biden is not the way, but he is the door. And we need to get out of this. We need out. Once we get out of this, we can pressure people. We can at least put pressure on the administration. We can't pressure this administration. You can't put pressure on these people. But you can, once we get out of this, we can at least put pressure on people again to stand by claims that they claim to stand by. These folks don't at all. So that's where I would come down on that. I'm going to have to get going here pretty quickly though.
Me too.
I am 6 minutes late for class, but I told my students I'd be a little late. I told them I'd be a little late.
Oh my gosh. Reggie, before you go, I've been meaning to ask you this forever. When we're past this, can you and I put together a pilgrimage to West Africa and invite people to go?
Gosh, yeah.
I have been thinking about this for a couple of years now, and I thought I really want to go. I want to go with you, but I think it'd be really fun for us to sort of do it together and see who would come with us. I think it would be great.
Absolutely. I've already got connections over there, but I love that space. Absolutely. Let's make it happen. Let's do it.
Oh, I really want to do this with you, and I may COVID go away.
Yes.
Quickly, yes. Come quickly, Lord Jesus, heal the world.
All right. I love it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Reggie. You can disappear and go to your class.
All right. Bye.
Really appreciate it.
Great to see
you. Good to see you too.
Awesome. That was fun.
It was amazing. Oh my gosh. I said that already. I love him.
I know.
He's so smart. It's such a joy when you're, you know this too, when you come into a class and you don't know anybody, and then all of a sudden somebody starts sparkling and you just think to yourself, oh my gosh, that student is going to go really far. And so Reggie was one of those amazing people.
Well, I really feel like you should receive all the praise and credit he was passing along. And, that was very high. And thank you for, what's funny is, so I was like, homebrew people love Reggie. We should have Reggie on. I did not know that Diana was like his professor. And that's just so crazy. The whoop, whoop, whoop. That was a wavelength moment. So yeah.
Well, awesome. I can remember with incredible clarity teaching him American religious history and doing the unit on slaveholding. And we had a debate in class between people who were pro-slavery and people who were abolitionists. And I asked the students to take a side because I didn't want to put them in sides because I thought, oh my gosh, that could be really horrible. And Reggie came to me and he said he wanted to argue the pro-slavery side. And he did. He argued the pro-slavery side. And hearing that argument come out of him made those students at that college so uncomfortable because they saw how evil the argument was. And it was one of the bravest acts that I've ever seen a student do, is take an argument that he knew was hurtful and to reveal that hurt and harm. I mean, you could see that as an 18-year-old. He had that ethicist brain going. And so anyway, I admire him greatly.
Wow. That is serious. Yeah, I get it. Well, thank you everyone for hanging out on all the different platforms. We're getting together on Tuesday next week. Tuesday night, same time. We're going to ruin your dinner. And I'm really having fun with this, Diana. I'm glad we convinced each other to do this.
Yeah, me too. It gives me a chance to pause in the week and think, what am I going to talk with Tripp about tonight? And, we never really plan it. We just sort of start following the pathway of the news, and to have it take us to these really interesting places tonight about prayer and mainline decline and racism. I mean, it was just a really interesting conversation. So thank you for making it happen.
Yeah. And there are a number of questions that came in about managing responses to the abortion question. So that one's going to come up. Just wait till when Diana explains the story about how abortion became an issue and religion and politics and the state. Oh, see, it's going to be a good old time. And Kristen Dumez, that wrote the Jesus and John Wayne book, just tweeted me during this that she's going to come on in the next week or so. So we have to work out the time. But Jesus and John Wayne conversation, that's going to be a blast. Though I think I'll just let y'all talk since y'all are historians and have lots of cool things to say. I'll just take credit for having tweeted her about it.
Oh, I'm so glad she said yes, because I want to have that conversation with her. And as we wrap up tonight, pay attention. Don't pay attention to everything. Find the points that seem to be the points of theology and prayer and spirituality that you need to leverage, and let other things just pass by you right now. That whole thing about Kamala Harris and the monster comment, that wasn't just outrage. That's actually expressive of something that's really important. And something else, as you ended with abortion, people might want to pay attention to. The treatment.
Supreme Court stuff's coming up, yeah.
Yeah, that's coming up. But also the treatment that Trump has been touting as his miracle cure, Regeneron or whatever the name of that new drug is, that's actually made in part with fetal tissue from abortion. Yeah, isn't that great? That's really fun.
Are you telling me that he's not internally consistent? Because I thought it was his winning that made our head spin.
Oh, but isn't that amazing? It's just like it's all been all abortion 100% of the time, and now he's touting this drug that, according to several reports that I read today, the very reputable things, is that in part the drug was developed with fetal tissue.
Well, I think we have looking on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, there's a wholehearted endorsement and excitement that Biden is the door, but not the way. So we got to knock that door loud. And that we'll look forward to Tuesday, ruining your dinner. And good night.
Good night.